Welcome to This Explainer. We are going to dive straight into the most famous opening line in Western literature and systematically peel back the layers to reveal a profound linguistic matrix that, honestly, most translations completely miss. Today, we aren't just reading a text, we're decoding a brilliant ancient blueprint. If you think you already know how the story of existence begins, well, prepare to have your perspective entirely shifted by the sheer architectural brilliance of ancient linguistics. Let's get into it.
For centuries, this is exactly how we've read the start of the biblical narrative. You know it, I know it. It's crisp, it's absolute, and it perfectly sets the stage. But what's really interesting here is what this super familiar phrase might actually be leaving out. You see, every translation is inherently a choice, and every choice illuminates one aspect of a text while inevitably casting shadows over another. So let's lean into a really fascinating question. Could a simple translation gap conceal an entirely different metaphysical blueprint for the whole universe? We're looking at a text that was originally written without vowels, which offers multiple layers of reading. Some are grammatical and some are highly symbolic. What happens when we stop looking at this sentence as just a basic chronological starting point and start looking at it as a complex, dynamic matrix? When we juxtapose the widely accepted Greek title Genesis with the original Hebrew word Bereshit, we immediately spot a huge anomaly in how the very origin of existence is framed. The Greek term Genesis, courtesy of the ancient Septuagint translation, implies an origin, a birth, a definitive coming into existence. But the Hebrew text? It doesn't name books based on a summary of their content, it names them by their first word. And that first word, Bereshit, carries a vastly different frequency. The grammar here is absolutely crucial. If the text simply wanted to say in the beginning in a closed absolute sense, it actually could have used a word like Barishonah. But Bereshit isn't a static date carved into some dusty archive. It's an ongoing suspended moment. It essentially demands to be attached to an action. So it literally translates closer to in the beginning of, or in the beginning when God was creating. We aren't looking at a finished closed door here. We're watching a scene actively open while the work is currently occurring. And this brilliantly illustrates our next Socratic puzzle. If the point was simply to tell us that God created everything, why wouldn't the author just start the sentence with his name, Elohim? It would be so much more direct, right? Like, Elohim created, in the beginning, the heavens and the earth. But it doesn't do that. The deliberate choice to place Bereshit before the creator's name suggests that the beginning holds a structural importance that precedes even the action of God. The author is essentially suggesting that starting with Bereshit points to a principle, a supreme intelligence that actually precedes the operational, active shaping force of the creator. We aren't talking about time here, like a before and after on a human clock. We're talking about metaphysics. This is a primordial matrix, a foundational intelligence from which the very power to create actually proceeds. Think of it as the absolute mind that exists before the hand even begins to model the clay. In this interpretation, Elohim acts as the operational face and ordering function that proceeds from an even higher primordial matrix. Notice how Elohim is treated as a singular noun in the text, yet it actually possesses a plural form. Now, that's not a typo or a grammatical error, it's a profound symbol. Elohim represents the function through which the ultimate principle translates into action, separation, and cosmic order. It is the active, operating force manifesting from that deeper, ineffable root.
This brings us to a mind-bending metaphysical concept. If a father generates a son, doesn't the very concept of fatherhood imply a pre-existing structural relationship that must come from an even higher principle? I mean, if God manifests as a father, that paternity is already a structure, a relationship. And if there's a relationship, well, it forces us to ask, from what ultimate principle does that relational structure originate? We're looking at a father before the father, a metaphysical root that makes the very act of divine generation possible in the first place. To understand how meaning gets lost or shifts over time, let's briefly look at how modern languages evolve, dramatically changing their vocabulary over just a few centuries. For example, if you compare an Italian translation of Genesis from 1607 next to one from 1994, the structure of the language, the phrasing, and the vocabulary shift significantly. Modern languages rely on letters that represent phonetic sounds, and as culture changes, the meanings of the words those sounds form evolve too. But ancient Hebrew doesn't work like modern Italian or English.
Its letters are pictograms, meaning they act way more like conceptual mathematics, where symbols combine to create deeper meaning. A pictogram isn't just a phonetic sound you make with your mouth, it's a visual representation of an object or an idea. And because every single letter carries its own conceptual weight, the words they form aren't just phonetic labels, they're literally equations of meaning.
Okay, let's dive into these visual equations. This is where it gets incredibly cool. Look at the Hebrew word for father, av. It's made of 2 letters, aleph and beth. Aleph is the ox head, representing force, leader, or principle. Beth is the tent, or the house. When you combine the ancient symbol for force with the symbol for a house, you get father, the force that sustains the house. Now look at the word for sun, ben. It combines Beth, the house, with Nun, the cedar continuity. So the sun is quite literally the continuation of the house. So a sun, or ben, isn't just biologically created. The word itself visually represents the continuation of that house, deeply connecting the father to the generated inheritance. The aleph, the ultimate principle or spirit, enters the Beth, the house. And once that happens, the house is no longer just a physical location. It becomes a lineage, a generation. The father isn't just making a separate object. He is ensuring an inheritance by passing on his very essence.
All right, next section, created, made, or generated. Let's see how these verbs of existence build into a massive metaphysical difference between creating out of nothing and physically generating something. This isn't just semantic nitpicking, folks. This distinction forms the absolute bedrock of ancient theological architecture, and it's hidden right there in the language.
So, the crucial point here is understanding these distinct theological concepts: creating an object, fashioning an object, and generating something from your own substance. In Hebrew, bara means to create or bring into existence, while asa means to make, fashion, or operate upon something that's already there. And then we have a totally different concept: generating, or genitum, which means something proceeds directly from your own substance. We see this tension perfectly preserved in the Latin Credo, which refers to the maker of heaven and earth, but deliberately calls the Son generated, not made. Notice the super deliberate use of language here. It says factorum, maker or fashioner of heaven and earth. But when it speaks of the Son, it explicitly states genitum non factum, generated, not made. It goes way out of its way to separate the act of making the universe from the act of generating the Son. These precise words matter immensely. Generating implies transmitting your very essence, unlike a craftsman simply making a separate object. A created or manufactured thing exists entirely outside of its maker, right? A sculpture is not the sculptor. But something that is generated carries the direct substance, the light, and the legacy of the generator. The ultimate principle doesn't just produce a product outside of itself. It transmits an inheritance. When we peel back these linguistic layers, we're forced to ask uncomfortable but really illuminating questions about the true scale, nature, and phases of biblical creation. Why does God seem to take on different names and operational characteristics in different texts? Is the creation narrative referring to the entire universe or just our specific order of existence? Digging into these ancient pictograms doesn't give us easy, dogmatic answers. Instead, it hands us the keys to unlock entirely new ways of interrogating the text.
All right, for our final mic drop today, let's literally break down the blueprint of the word Adam. It isn't just a man, it's a mystic formula showing the primordial breath passing through the threshold into the matrix of physical reality. Look at the Hebrew spelling of Adam: Aleph, Dalet, Mem. Aleph is the origin, the unity, the divine breath. Dalet is the door, the threshold, the passage. Mem is the water, the deep matrix of reality. Adam isn't just a noun. It is the mathematical formula of the divine breath crossing the threshold to enter the physical matrix.
I'll leave you with this final, lingering thought. If this much architectural brilliance is hidden in a single name, how much more of the universe's true nature is waiting to be properly translated? We look at a text and see a simple story, but right beneath it lies an astonishingly complex blueprint of existence. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep looking closer at the structures around you, and never, ever underestimate the profound power hidden inside a single word.